been waiting for. 3 wide off turn number 4. New race leader at the line. It is Joey Logano, but they remain.
What defines NASCAR? I shouldn't need to tell you that NASCAR is more than driving in circles. It's the most distinctive and competitive racing series in the world. Drivers with skill, stamina, grit, and passion wheel some of the fastest machines on Earth. NASCAR is more than a sport. It's a touring festival that crosses the country and the world. It's the motorsport built for everyone. As Ken Squire once put it, they're common men doing uncommon things. Over more than 75 years, the sport has moved from the beach at Daytona and the hills of the Carolinas to an international brand, the centerpiece of American racing. Some have become legends by shattering records. Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, Jimmy Johnson, and Jeff Gordon, to name a few. Along the way, some drivers have become iconic by fans who ask what could have been. Alan Kulwicki, Adam Petty, Rob Moroso, and Davey Allison. And along the way, thousands of drivers played their own small roles in the live spectacle the series continues to push forward. The NASCAR of today would look far different if even a few things changed decades ago. What you're about to see is the story so far in a new NASCAR timeline, which began in 1981. This series, which started 4 years ago, does more than asking what if. We're rewriting racing history. Welcome to Sunday Night Lights. Sunday Night Lights is a simulation that's creating NASCAR alternate history with a unique creative edge. It uses mods for NASCAR Racing 2003 season to create the most elaborate NASCAR simulation to date. I started this series 4 years ago, and since then I've learned so much about what makes NASCAR special, whether in its history, its characters, or its innovation. We've run hundreds of races in the NASCAR National Series, plus IROC, up to the 1997 season. 17 years and counting. And now today, I bring Sunday Night Lights Restart. This video is an entry point to catch you up on this timeline. And for longtime viewers, it presents the story in a new, better way, featuring all new footage from a mix of archived replays and reenactments. This video will cover the 1981 season up until the middle of 1989, and the second part will cover 1989 to 1997, where the timeline stands today. For those of you who are new, here are a few of my ground rules. Number 1, there will not be any fatalities in the series. I don't feel comfortable doing that, and I want to celebrate each and every driver that appears in the series. Injuries can happen for extreme circumstances, but those are rare. Number 2, I do not interfere with the results and winners. This is almost entirely a pure simulation, the only exceptions being a few chosen story elements, which will only affect a moment of a race and not the winners, pole sitters, or champions. These are very few and far between. And number 3, create new ideas where possible. This is more than a what-if series. It explores a creative mindset through the history of NASCAR, with the simulation being the driver of it all. Some drivers will have similar fates to real life, and others will be radically different, so deciding where they end up will balance both realism and creativity. With all that out of the way, let's go back to the beginning. Welcome back to 1981. We now go back to where it all began, as we show you the opening lap of the 1981 Daytona 500. Bobby Allison and Dave Marcus are side by side as they roar down the backstretch and into turns 3 and 4. Still side by side, Dave Marcus seems to have the advantage on that inside line as they now come off of turn 4, and Ricky Rudd in the 88 is starting to pop into the picture. And coming back to the start and finish line, it's going to be Dave Marcus leading lap 1 over Ricky Rudd. The first caution of the race came out on lap 19 during green flag pit stops when Johnny Rutherford slammed into the number 3 of Richard Childress, causing a pileup that also collected Donnie Allison, Neil Bonnet, and Glenn Jarrett. Jeff Bodine also ran into the 86 of Elliott Forbes Robinson that caused him to lose control of his number 23 car. Under that same caution, Tim Richmond lost control of his car coming off turn 2, and then the 68 of Lenny Pond would drive in him and go sliding into the grass, as well as the 24 of Cecil Gordon running into the back of Richmond. Both Richmond and Gordon were done for the day. Jody Ridley would then restart as the leader with several cars on the tail end of the lead lap ahead of him. The race would then be turned upside down with 15 laps to go as Bobby Allison had the car to beat. However, that would all change when the lap car of Tom Sneva would cut up in front of the charging Allison, and this would trigger a pileup. Sneva put Allison into the wall, and then Allison would hit the 27 of Cale Yarborough. Tommy Gale would lead the field back to the green flag with 10 laps to go, with Cale Yarborough 2nd, Jimmy Means 3rd, Richard Petty 4th, and Buddy Baker in 5th. The Daytona 500 that year had an upset victory in the form of 46-year-old Tommy Gale from McKeesport, Pennsylvania, driving for car owner Elmo Langley, as he beat the Sports King to earn his first Winston Cup victory. Final lap for Tommy Gale as he's trying to hold off Richard Petty, and he has just 4 more corners to go. Gale still has a pretty good gap between himself and Petty as they come off turn 2 and down the back straightaway for the final time in the Daytona 500. In what has been a wild turn of events here in Daytona, it's going to be Tommy Gale holding off Richard Petty, and he's going to get his first Winston Cup Series win at the Daytona 500. What a huge win for the 46-year-old, and this will be one he remembers for the rest of his life. 2 drivers in particular dominated the 1981 Winston Cup season, those being one of the members of the Alabama gang, Bobby Allison, and Owensboro, Kentucky native Darrell Waltrip. Allison started the season strong, winning the season opener at Riverside, then winning the Clash and one of the dual races at Daytona. He returned to victory lane in the 4th race of the season at Rockingham, then again 4 races later in the spring Darlington race. He then won during the summer at Texas World in the 2nd Talladega race. Allison would also sweep both races at Dover and Rockingham. Meanwhile, Darrell Waltrip won 11 times on the season, earning 19 top 5s and 20 top 10s. At one point, Waltrip won 3 in a row at the Daytona Summer Race, the Nashville Fairgrounds, and Pocono. Adding on to that, Waltrip also earned wins at the Spring Atlanta Race, the Spring Talladega Race, and dominating on the short tracks as he swept both Bristol races, both Martinsville races, and both Richmond races. Despite Waltrip's dominant season, a slump towards the end allowed Bobby Allison to come from behind and earn his first ever NASCAR Winston Cup championship. He won the championship driving for Harry Ranier's team. Bobby Allison earned 8 wins on the season, 20 top 5s, and 24 top 10s. Speaking of which, Allison would remain with this team moving forward thanks to the championship run. One breakout driver in 1981 was Dyegard Racing's Ricky Rudd in the number 88 Gatorade Chevrolet. His wins all came on short tracks, sweeping both North Wilkesboro races and winning at Nashville. Rudd would also earn 14 top 5s, 21 top 10s, and 2 pole awards. He would end up re-signing with Dyegard Racing for 1982. Another driver that rose to the occasion was Terry Labonte, driving for Hagan Racing. The Texas native would earn wins in the World 600 at Charlotte, as well as the second Michigan race and the season finale at Riverside. Labonte would also earn 15 top 5s and 23 top 10s. Both he and Ricky Rudd would look to be championship contenders for years to come. Richard Petty also had a strong season, earning 1 win at Riverside during the summer, while collecting 14 top 5s and 20 top 10s. Petty continues on his road to potentially 200 career wins and chasing an 8th championship. Other notable winners for 1981 included Buddy Arrington getting his first career win at Michigan, Buddy Baker winning the Southern 500, Jody Ridley driving for Junie Dunleavy winning the Fall Charlotte race, and Dave Marcus taking the Atlanta Fall race. And here's a look at all of the winners for the 1981 NASCAR Winston Cup Series season, as well as the top 20 in the standings. Allison defeated Waltrip for the 1981 title by 161 points. Terry Labonte finished 3rd, 329 points back, Ricky Rudd in 4th, 368 points back, and Richard Petty in 5th, 588 points back. Strong seasons for the likes of Jody Ridley, Dave Marcus, and J.D. McDuffie, as well as Buddy Arrington, as they all finished inside the top 10. However, one notable driver to point out is Dale Earnhardt, the 1980 champion, who finished 14th. The likes of him, Morgan Shepherd, and Benny Parsons will look to turn things around in 1982. Dale Earnhardt has already announced that he is departing the number 2 team, which was owned by Rod Osterlund, but was suddenly bought by Jim Stacy halfway through the season. Not to mention that Earnhardt spent the last 11 races of that season with car owner Richard Childress. Earnhardt will move to Bud Moore's team for 1982, hoping to get back on track and chase more wins and championships. After 1981, we had our first notable schedule change, as Texas World Speedway remains on the schedule. The 2-mile oval in College Station will remain part of the Winston Cup Series. (1982) saw the debut of the Budweiser Sportsman division, which would later become the NASCAR Busch Series. The new series would eventually become a stomping ground for future prospects in NASCAR. The inaugural schedule had one difference compared to real life, that being an additional race at the iconic quarter-mile Bowman Gray Stadium. The schedule, meanwhile, would consist mainly of short tracks across the eastern portion of the United States, while going to a few bigger tracks such as Daytona, Darlington, and Charlotte. There were also some notable Winston Cup drivers that ended up making select starts throughout the season, names such as Dale Earnhardt, Morgan Shepherd, Jeff Bodine, and Jody Ridley. Sam Maher not only won the first race of the season, but became the inaugural champion of the circuit, while we were beginning to see future stars take shape. Among the up-and-comers in the series was Danny Marshall, who made his entrance into NASCAR by running select Winston Cup races in 1981. He ran the full season and went on to finish 5th in the points, all while earning 3 wins, 7 top 5s, and 11 top 10s with an average finish of 12.48. Marshall hopes to make a run at the championship in 1983. However, the biggest surprise of the season would be young driver Bubba Nissen. The 22-year-old from Virginia earned 3 wins on the season while running all but 2 races, and would earn 6 top 5s and 14 top 10s. Nissan hopes to make a run for the Busch Series title in 1983, and as for Ard's championship season, he had 5 wins, 12 top 5s, and 18 top 10s with an average finish of 8.9. Ard won races at the season opener at Daytona, the spring Bristol race, twice at Martinsville, and at Charlotte. Jack Ingram would finish second in the standings with 3 wins, 10 top 5s, and 17 top 10s with an average finish of 9.62. In third was Phil Parsons, who had 3 wins, 9 top 5s, and 14 top 10s with an average finish of 11.07. Here are the final standings and the winners from the inaugural Budweiser Sportsman Division season. As previously mentioned, the 2-mile oval in College Station, Texas World Speedway, will remain on the NASCAR schedule for many years to come. Moving over to the Winston Cup, Ricky Rudd remained with Dygaard Racing, and Bobby Allison stayed with Harry Ranier. Benny Parsons would end up driving the number 3 for Richard Childress. Leading up to the Great American Race, we saw a surprise winner in the first dual race in the form of Roy Smith, a champion of the Winston West Series. He would start 4th and go on to finish 16th in the big race. Speaking of which, the Daytona 500 featured an upset winner for the 2nd year in a row. James Hilton was able to hold off Neil Bonnet and Tim Richmond for the win, in which would mark his 3rd and final career Winston Cup victory. The 47-year-old and 18-year veteran of the series had entered a second car for his own team in the number 49, and despite having little sponsorship, he took that very car to victory lane. Darrell Waltrip and Bobby Allison picked up where they left off last year, as Waltrip would earn 8 wins, 21 top 5s, and 25 top 10s. Bobby Allison, meanwhile, would earn 6 wins, 15 top 5s, and 20 top 10s. Behind them, Terry Labonte was beginning to become a factor in the championship hunt, as he earned 3 wins, 14 top 5s, and 20 top 10s. However, he would come up short as the runner-up to Darrell Waltrip, the 1982 champion. This would mark the first championship victory for Darrell Waltrip. Waltrip said afterwards about how it felt great to make up for last season and how everything came together at the right time to run away with the championship. He also said he feels great about his team and feels confident that they can win more titles in the coming years. Terry Labonte also felt like that his team was close to winning the Winston Cup, stating, "We're very close. We have the crew, we have the equipment, and we have everything we need to make a championship victory a reality. I feel good with what Hagan has put together. A year from now, my goal is to be interviewed as the Winston Cup champion." Bobby Allison was happy that he finally got a championship added to his resume last season and reflected on nearly making it back-to-back. Quote, "We're in a good spot right now. We've been more successful than ever before. I'm thankful to have a championship, and it's hard to win here, but I definitely have some good years left before I decide to retire. I feel like we can win another title for sure." Dale Earnhardt, who moved over to Budmore Engineering for 1982, had a great first half of the season, as he would enter the summer Daytona race 2nd in the standings. However, he had many more DNFs in the second half of the season. The 1980 champion finished the year 11th in the standings with 0 wins, 9 top 5s, and 15 top 10s. Earnhardt looked back on his 1982 season saying, quote, "We had a lot of goods and some bads. I admit I was pushing hard at times. Bud and I have discussed what went wrong, and we have a good idea on how to improve things for next season." Benny Parsons, who was driving for Richard Childress, had a rough season as he would finish 19th in the standings, despite having 2 wins, which came back-to-back at Rockingham and Darlington. He also had 7 top 5s and 9 top 10s with an average finish of 19.87. Some notable moments of the season included a win for Jimmy Means at Dover, as well as watching a rising star in Tim Richmond, who finished 6th in the points, despite only running 28 of the 31 races. He earned 1 win at Riverside, which was the season finale, as well as 13 top 5s and 19 top 10s. And here are the winners from the 1982 Winston Cup Series season, as well as the top 20 in the standings. Next up is the 1983 season, as we take a look at the Budweiser Sportsman Division schedule. Bowman Gray is once again on the schedule with no other notable changes. Sam Ard would finish the season with 4 wins, 14 top 5s, and 23 top 10s. He also had an average finish of 8.65. Another up-and-coming driver in Danny Marshall would finish 3rd in the standings with 5 wins, 12 top 5s, and 23 top 10s. He entered the season finale at Martinsville as the points leader, however he would crash out of the race, costing him a chance at championship glory. Phil Parsons had a season similar to last year, as he remained in the title hunt for most of 1983. He collected 3 wins, those being at Richmond, Hickory, and Indianapolis Raceway Park. He also had 8 top 5s and 20 top 10s. Jack Ingram finished out the top 5 in the standings, but he had a winless season, while earning 8 top 5s and 22 top 10s. As we mentioned Bubba Nissen in the previous season, he quickly became a championship contender. He ended up winning 5 races, also earning 13 top 5s and 24 top 10s with an average finish of 9.6. Despite Sam Ard winning the season finale at Martinsville, in what was a close championship battle, it was Bubba Nissen scoring the Busch Series championship by just 6 points over Sam Ard. Here are all the winners and the final standings from the 1983 Budweiser Sportsman Division season. Moving on to the Winston Cup, the biggest move for 1983 was Cale Yarborough, as he signed with Harry Ranier and his new number 22 Miller Lite Buick. Ricky Rudd continued with Dygard, while Bobby Allison and Benny Parsons remained in their rides. And here is the Winston Cup Series schedule for 1983, as there were no notable changes. The 1983 Daytona 500 was won in dominating fashion by one of the sport's all-time greats, the only driver to ever win 3 consecutive championships in NASCAR, that being Cale Yarborough. And for Yarborough, this would mark his only win of 1983, and this would also be his final Winston Cup Series victory. Bobby Allison looked to be the championship favorite, back with Harry Ranier in the number 28 Hardee's car, but he had a new challenger come into the fold. In his first full-time season, Dawsonville, Georgia's Bill Elliott stormed onto the scene. Elliott had the points lead and the Winston Cup championship in his sights heading into the final race at Riverside, but then, during the course of the race, heartbreak would strike. Dale Earnhardt is currently leading, Terry Labonte chasing him down in second, and Bill Elliott's doing all he can to hold out Bobby Allison. They're side by side for a moment, but it looks like Elliott is trying to pull away. However, now I'm hearing reports that Bill Elliott could be having some sort of issue. Bill Elliott has been starting to lose spots. There may be something wrong with his number 9 Ford, and indeed there is. Elliott has come down with a major mechanical issue. He came in today as the points leader, and most likely he will lose the championship at this point. Absolute devastation for Bill Elliott, and now all eyes are on Bobby Allison, who is now in the cusp of winning his second championship in 3 years. Bobby Allison would go on to pick up his second Winston Cup Series championship in 3 years, with 5 wins, 14 top 5s, and 24 top 10s. He was also the only driver to have an average finishing position in the single digits, with a 9.35 average finish. As for Elliott, he earned 4 wins, 14 top 5s, and 21 top 10s. Darrell Waltrip had another strong season with 7 wins, 16 top 5s, and 17 top 10s. However, he only finished 3rd in the standings after an inconsistent end to the season. Also of note was the Spring Atlanta race, which had a first career win. A young driver by the name of Mark Martin kick-started his career with a win for J.D. Stacy's number 2 car. He would go on to replace Dale Earnhardt in the Bud Moore number 15 next year. Martin would finish out 1983 by finishing an impressive 10th in the standings and adding on 4 top 5s and 11 top 10s, as well as 5 pole awards. Martin would finish right behind Dale Earnhardt in the standings as Earnhardt improved in 1983. He won 3 races, 2 of which were back-to-back at the second Talladega and Michigan races, then again at the second Richmond race. He also earned 6 top 5s and 13 top 10s. And here's a final look at the standings and the list of winners from the 1983 Winston Cup season. Moving on now to 1984 as we take a look at the Busch Grand National Series. The most notable change is that the schedule scales back from 35 to 29 races. The season started off with an upset winner at Daytona as dirt racing star Sammy Swindell took on the high banks of Daytona and picked up the win. This would mark the first and only win of his Busch Series career. Danny Marshall would finish runner-up in the standings as he finished the season with 2 wins, 16 top 5s, and 20 top 10s, just 70 points back. Sam Ard and Tommy Houston both had 4 wins apiece on the season as they finished 3rd and 4th in the point standings. Ard won races at the first Richmond race, the first Orange County race, the first South Boston race, and the second Langley race. Houston, meanwhile, won both Hickory races, Dover, and the second Orange County race. Bubba Nissen continued to put on a show and dominate the circuit to win the championship. This would convince him to move up to the Winston Cup Series for 1985. He would cap off the season with 3 wins, 13 top 5s, and 21 top 10s with an average finish of 8.31. And here are the final standings and the winners from the 1984 Busch Grand National Series season. After a 3-year absence, the International Race of Champions, also known as IROC, made a return to racing. The season consisted of the season opening and ending at Michigan, with Cleveland and Talladega in between. Dale Earnhardt won at Michigan, while Cale Yarborough won at Cleveland and Talladega, and Benny Parsons won the second Michigan race. Cale Yarborough would end up taking home the IROC Championship for 1984 by just 9 points over Benny Parsons. Another track whose fate changes is the Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway, as they will host the Winston Cup Series beyond 1984. Though with a smaller field than other tracks, this is the only major change on the Winston Cup schedule. Some major silly season changes involved, as mentioned earlier, Dale Earnhardt moving over to Richard Childress Racing, bringing Wrangler over with him as a sponsor, while Mark Martin takes over Bud Moore's number 15 Ford. Bobby Allison is still with Harry Ranier's team, while Ricky Rudd is with Dygaard. Speaking of which, that team partnered up with Cliff Stewart to open a second ride for up-and-comer Rusty Wallace in the number 89 Burger King car. 1984 featured one of the most iconic finishes in Daytona 500 history, when Dale Earnhardt and Ricky Rudd ended up in a situation where they had to race back to the line that would determine the outcome of the race. The two drivers were about to enter the history books together. We are getting down to it now. We are coming to the line with 2 laps to go, and it is down to Earnhardt and Rudd to win the Great American Race, and we got a crash in the back. Huge crash in the back. The yellow is out, and the 2 leaders are going to race it back. This is for the Great American Race, the Daytona 500, the biggest race on the schedule. On board with Rudd, he goes to the inside of Earnhardt, down the back straightaway, under green for the final time this afternoon. Who is it going to be? Ricky Rudd is trying everything he can. He gets to the quarter panel of the 3, coming off turn 4. Side by side. This is for the win! Earnhardt, Rudd, back to the line, Earnhardt! Dale Earnhardt has won the Daytona 500 in a thrilling finish, coming to the final lap, which is under yellow, and barring any issues, Dale Earnhardt will win this race. Checkered flag waves, and it is official. Dale Earnhardt has won the Daytona 500 for 1984. No doubt about it, this was the most thrilling finish in Daytona 500 history. And if the 1980 championship didn't do it already, Dale Earnhardt is certainly on the map now. He's already got the sport's 2 biggest prizes to his name, and this is only his 5th Winston Cup season. Time will tell how high he'll climb the ranks. The 1984 Winston Cup Championship went to a rising star from the Lone Star State named Terry Labonte, driving for Billy Hagan. He went on to take home 8 wins, 17 top 5s, and 25 top 10s. Labonte's wins involved the first Martinsville race, both Nashville races, both Riverside races, back-to-back wins in the summer at Talladega in Michigan, as well as the Southern 500. He would win it over Harry Gant by just 40 points. Gant won 6 races in 1984 in what was a career year for the 44-year-old. He also earned 18 top 5s and 23 top 10s. His average finishing position was almost dead even with champion Terry Labonte. Dale Earnhardt would finish 3rd in the standings as he collected another win at the spring Atlanta race. He and Richard Childress were now firing on all cylinders as the number 3 team would earn 13 top 5s and 24 top 10s in what was a very strong season for them. Bobby Allison and Ricky Rudd would finish 4th and 5th in the standings as Allison earned 3 wins, those coming at the first Dover race, the second Bristol race, and Texas World. The biggest upset of the season happened at Pocono when Dick Brooks brought home his first win since 1973 driving for Junie Dunlevy, and this would be the second and final career victory for Brooks. Another notable moment was the Fall Richmond race, as Jeff Bodine was driving for a new team by the name of All-Star Racing, a team owned by car dealer magnate Rick Hendrick. There were fears in the team's shop that they were not going to make it, but Hendrick persisted and kept his faith. White flag in the air for Jeff Bodine for All-Star Racing, this new team owned by Rick Hendrick. He's been a little concerned about the future of his team. He didn't know if he was going to be able to keep the shop going, but looks like he's going to now with this victory. And off turn 4, this will certainly be something special. Jeff Bodine wins at Richmond for car owner Rick Hendrick and their first ever win for that number 5 team. And I'm sure this will be the first of many for this team. Bodine would go on to finish 9th in the standings. With the Richmond win, he added on 7 top 5s and 17 top 10s. This helped Rick Hendrick's team gain a ton of momentum going into 1985. Here are the winners and the final standings from the 1984 Winston Cup Series season. Now heading into the 1985 season, we start off by taking a look at the Busch Series schedule for 1985, where Bubba Nissen was the king for the last couple of seasons. One notable track that was added was Salem Speedway in Salem, Indiana. With Bubba Nissen moving on to the Winston Cup, the throne had a new king, as Danny Marshall finally broke out onto the scene as he would earn 5 wins, 13 top 5s, and 22 top 10s, with an average finishing position of 7.48. Marshall was the Busch Series champion for 1985 as he held off Sam Ard by 76 points. Ard himself had another great season, despite coming up short once again of a second championship. He earned 4 wins, 14 top 5s, and 21 top 10s. Some notable moments in the season included L.D. Ottinger winning the season opener at Daytona. This was his second career win as he earned his first at Rockingham a season ago. And here are all the winners from the 1985 Busch Series season, as well as the final standings. In the world of IROC, the NASCAR stars had a rather down year. Darrell Waltrip did win the final race of the season at Michigan, but the previous 3 races were won by Bobby Rahal at Daytona, Mario Andretti at Mid-Ohio, and Derek Bell winning at Talladega. Speaking of which, Derek Bell would be the one to win the IROC Championship for 1985, scoring this one for the World Endurance Championship. As we take a look at the winners once again, it was a close championship battle as Terry Labonte lost it out by 3 points and John Watson by just 4 points. In the 1985 Daytona 500, there was a restart with 3 laps to go as Darrell Waltrip was trying to hold back Buddy Baker, Bill Elliott, Mark Martin, and Bobby Hillin Jr. to finally win the Great American Race. And in the end, Darrell Waltrip was able to check off a win that he was long searching for at the beginning of 1985, as he would go on to win the Daytona 500 with Junior Johnson. One notable upset during the Winston Cup season took place at the first Michigan race as longtime veteran J.D. McDuffie found a way into the lead and would score his first career Winston Cup victory. This would also be the only win of McDuffie's career. The upsets, however, were not done, as Ron Bouchard won the Firecracker 400 at Daytona in the very next race. And the race after that saw Sam Ard, making part-time Cup starts that season, win at the Nashville Fairgrounds. Ard won this race holding off Darrell Waltrip and Bill Elliott. This would be the only Cup win of his career, as the summer of 1985 was quickly becoming the summer of the underdogs. Kyle Petty would also earn the first and second wins of his career, as he won the Spring Atlanta race and the first Pocono race. As for who rose to the top, we had a young, well-deserved first-time champion. After suffering heartbreak 2 seasons ago and missing out on the championship, Bill Elliott was able to claw his way back to score the Winston Cup Championship for 1985 with Melling Racing. Elliott beat out Darrell Waltrip by 129 points to score the title. Elliott had 6 wins with 17 top 5s and 21 top 10s. Elliott would earn wins at the first Richmond race, the first North Wilkesboro race, the first Talladega race, the second Pocono race, the second Dover race, and the second Charlotte race. Daytona 500 winner Darrell Waltrip would finish second in the standings, earning 3 wins, 13 top 5s, and 22 top 10s. Waltrip keeps coming up close, and if things had played out differently for him, he could have become a 4-time champion. For now, he only has 1. Jeff Bodine and Hendrick Motorsports had a solid and consistent 1985 season. Despite not winning a race, Bodine had 9 top 5s and 20 top 10s and would finish 3rd in the point standings. Another breakout driver this year hailed from the Alabama gang, Neil Bonnet. Bonnet collected 4 wins while earning 13 top 5s and 18 top 10s. Bonnet hopes to pick up where he left off in 1986 and contend for the championship. Bubba Nissen ran his first full season in 1985, and he was able to keep the car in one piece for most of the races. He would finish 21st in the standings with 3 top 5s, 6 top 10s, and an average finish of 18.79. He looks to build from his rookie season and improve in 1986. Here's a look at the final results and standings from the 1985 NASCAR Winston Cup Series season. Tim Richmond and Mark Martin both had solid seasons as they finished top 10 in the standings, and Bobby Allison and Terry Labonte had down years, finishing 11th and 12th. And to cap off 1985, this year also brought with it the inaugural NASCAR All-Star Race, known as the Winston. The race was held at Charlotte Motor Speedway and was won by Tim Richmond, driving for Raymond Beadle as he held off Darrell Waltrip for the win and picked up a massive paycheck. We now move into the second half of the 1980s as we take a look at the Busch Series schedule. The most notable change was NASCAR deciding to add a road course to the series, Road Atlanta in northern Georgia. Sam Ard had 1 win, 14 top 5s, and 18 top 10s, while third place Tommy Houston had 3 wins, 14 top 5s, and 16 top 10s. 1983 and 1984 saw back-to-back Busch Series champions, and we witnessed it again for 1985 and 1986, as Danny Marshall would go on to earn the championship. Not only did he win it, he dominated, winning the championship with an average finishing position of 7.32 and winning it by 330 points over Sam Ard. Marshall also had 4 wins, 15 top 5s, and 25 top 10s, as he finished in the top 10 in all but 6 races. And here are all the winners from the 1986 Busch Series season, as well as the top 10 in the final standings. With Danny Marshall's success, his plans will be to run a full season in the Winston Cup in 1987. Just a year after a sports car driver won the IROC title, it was a battle between stars from NASCAR and open wheel, as Kelly Yarborough represented NASCAR well, winning at Daytona and then again 2 races later at Talladega. The second race at Mid-Ohio and the final race at Watkins Glen were won by the open-wheel drivers, with Al Unser winning at Mid-Ohio and Bobby Rahal winning at Watkins Glen. Despite that, it was Kelly Yarborough winning the 1986 IROC Championship. Moving over to the Winston Cup Series, one notable change to note with Silly Season involved Davey Allison, the son of Bobby Allison, who was going to spend 1 season working on his craft with the Sattler Brothers number 95 team and contending for Rookie of the Year. Nothing else changes in terms of the 1986 schedule. The 1986 Daytona 500 saw an exciting battle to the checkered flag between Jeff Bodine of Hendrick Motorsports and Hagen Racing's Terry Labonte. They came off turn 4 side by side as Jeff Bodine just barely beat Labonte to the line to give Rick Hendrick his first Daytona 500. Hendrick's team was quickly becoming one of the fastest growing teams in the sport as Bodine looks to chase down a championship. For the second time in 3 years, our leaders were side by side going for the win at Daytona. Jody Ridley would surprise the NASCAR world again in 1986 as he earned his second career win at the Spring Dover race, which also locked him into the second annual All-Star race. Richard Petty was still looking strong in 1986 as he would finish 8th in the final standings, and while getting 6 top 5s and 14 top 10s, he would earn what would be his 199th career Winston Cup victory at the 12th race of the season at Riverside. Now, the King sets his eyes on getting number 200 in 1987. Tim Richmond had a huge season in 1986 as he would move over to Rick Hendrick's team. Richmond won 7 times in 1986 as he quickly became a very popular driver and a threat for the championship. He also earned 13 top 5s and 16 top 10s. He would finish third in the standings as he was in reach of the championship, but he had a few bad races towards the end of the season that would ultimately cost him. Speaking of the championship, Dale Earnhardt, the man dubbed as the Intimidator, would go on to win his second NASCAR Winston Cup Series championship and the first championship for Richard Childress. Earnhardt, like Richmond, was quickly becoming one of the most popular drivers in the Winston Cup Series. Earnhardt won 7 races just like Richmond, earning 15 top 5s and 18 top 10s, as well as 5 pole awards. Bobby Hillin Jr. also had an impressive season, and while he didn't find victory lane, he had 7 top 5s and 17 top 10s on his way to a 5th place finish in the standings. With that, here are the list of winners and the final point standings from the 1986 season. As previously mentioned, Bobby Hillin Jr. had an impressive season, finishing 5th in the final standings. Meanwhile, drivers like Mark Martin and Neil Bonnet are looking for improvements, while Bubba Nissen did slightly improve from his rookie season. And speaking of the rookies, Davey Allison finishes 22nd in the standings. Going into 1987, here's a look at the Busch Series schedule. One notable addition is the 14th race of the season taking place at Indiana Speedway. This creates a 3-race stretch across the state of Indiana that also consists of Salem and IRP. A couple of things to note for silly season: Sam Ard is still in the Busch Series and chasing a second championship, while Brett Bodine is driving for Rick Hendrick in the Busch Series. Rodney Combs and Larry Pearson led the field to the green flag to begin the season. There was a wreck on lap 32 as Glenn Jarrett slid up the track into Ronnie Silver, who was in 3rd at the time. Then on lap 48, the second caution came out when Larry Pollard got into Morgan Shepherd as he attempted to make a pass. This caused a pileup involving Bobby Allison and Mike Alexander. Then Alexander hit the 97 of Morgan Shepherd, causing him to go on his roof. There was a long green flag run to the finish afterwards as Elton Sawyer would make the pass on Jack Ingram coming to the checkered flag, and he would take the win at Daytona. In the 15th race of the season at IRP, Grant Adcox would take over Danny Marshall's Busch Series ride, and in his very first race in that car, he took full advantage of the opportunity and would go on to get his first career Busch Series victory. Adcox would also go on to earn wins at Oxford, South Boston, and Dover. At Road Atlanta, it was a wild race, and in the end, we had one of the biggest upsets of the season, with John Linville picking up what would be the only win of his career. There was really one driver that took over the Busch Series in 1987 and dominated. That driver was Larry Pearson, as he scored 9 wins while also earning 15 top 5s and 21 top 10s. Pearson won the title over Sam Ard, who comes close yet again, backed by 127 points. Ard didn't have any wins on the season, surprisingly enough, but he had 17 top 5s and 22 top 10s. Jimmy Hensley, driving for his family team, finished 3rd in the standings with 2 wins, 11 top 5s, and 19 top 10s. Here's a look at the final standings and all the winners from the 1987 Busch Series season. Other drivers to note include Brett Bodine and Dale Jarrett rounding out the top 5 in points, as well as Mark Martin having a strong year, as well as Brad Teague. To start off with the IROC season, we saw a clean green flag race at Daytona that was won by Jeff Bodine, who had just won the Daytona 500 the season before. Bodine would hold off Bill Elliott and Darrell Waltrip for the win. In the next race at Mid-Ohio, Bobby Rahal dominated on the 2.4-mile road course as he went on to win over Michael Andretti and Al Unser Jr. Then at Michigan, Al Unser Sr. had taken the lead coming to the white flag, but then Dale Earnhardt took the lead from him in turns 1 and 2, and it was the Intimidator holding off the Unsers for the win. Bobby Rahal had a 4-point lead over Jeff Bodine heading into the final race at Watkins Glen, and the one to prevail was Jeff Bodine, as he held off a charging Al Unser Jr. to win the race as well as the IROC championship. Bobby Rahal would fall to third in the standings, back by 17 points, and Al Unser Jr. would finish runner-up, just 11 points out of the championship. Here is the schedule for the 1987 Winston Cup Series. There are no major changes, but note the asterisk by the second Riverside race. That spot on the schedule is notable. We'll talk about why in a moment. Some silly season changes that came in for 1987 involved the growth of Hendrick Motorsports. Rick Hendrick opened 2 new teams for this season as Terry Labonte departed from Hagen Racing to drive the number 17 Tide Chevrolet. Jeff Bodine remained in the number 5, and Tim Richmond remained in the number 25 Folger Chevrolet. Hendrick also opened a 4th car for veteran Benny Parsons, as he was in the twilight of his racing career. Because Terry Labonte is at Hendrick, Darrell Waltrip signed an extension to continue driving for Junior Johnson. As mentioned before, Daniel Marshall would attempt the full Winston Cup season, and instead of driving the number 88, since Ricky Rudd is still at Dyard, Buddy Baker is in the 86. Davey Allison moved over to Harry Ranier's number 28 and was hoping to find the same kind of success that his father had in that car. Bobby Allison, meanwhile, moved to the Stavola Brothers number 22 machine, and Cale Yarbrough is now driving for his own team, while Sterling Marlin replaced Terry Labonte in the number 44 for Hagen Racing. And lastly, Terry Schoonover moves up to the Winston Cup Series after competing in ARCA for the last few years. Schoonover started 1987 driving for his own team and in search of sponsorship. The 1987 Daytona 500 came down to 3 drivers in particular: Buddy Baker, Ken Schrader, and Bill Elliott. While Baker and Schrader had the strongest cars, it was the Melling Racing number 9 Ford that had a huge surge in the closing laps and would hold off the 90 and the 86 to win the Daytona 500. This is Bill Elliott's first and currently only Daytona 500 victory. Danny Marshall, who as mentioned earlier was scheduled to run the entire Winston Cup schedule, was injured in a crash while practicing at Riverside. He would miss the rest of the season. With that, he tapped for Lake Speed to take over his number 85 ride, while Lake Speed decided to keep his team afloat and bring in Terry Schoonover, who had spent the last few years running strong in ARCA and was attempting the Winston Cup schedule with his own team. As mentioned earlier, Grant Adcox took over the Busch Series car, and after winning in his debut, he would drive it for the rest of the season. As for Riverside, they and NASCAR agreed for the track to undergo renovations, both for safety and for its facilities following Marshall's injury. The second Riverside race had a unique substitute, being hosted on the Texas World Speedway road course. That race was won by Kyle Petty. Riverside would return for 1988 and beyond. The 4th race of the season at Atlanta marked a very special and important milestone for one driver in particular. That driver was the king himself, Richard Petty. Petty had 199 career wins heading into 1987 and was looking for that elusive number 200. Atlanta was the day Petty broke through. Petty would lead most of the second half and would close out his 200th Winston Cup victory in front of a packed house. Not only that, but in the first Michigan race, Petty would once again find himself out front late and would extend his record with a 201st Winston Cup victory. Bubba Nissen, the feel-good story from the Busch Series, finally shined in the spotlight in the Winston Cup, as in the 12th race of the season at Pocono, he had to hold off several top teams to go on and earn his first career Winston Cup victory. During the summer, Tim Richmond announced that he would be taking a break from racing. He was committed to returning, and Rick Hendrick already confirmed a full-time seat would await him, even if Richmond took his time. Richmond said that weekend, quote, "I had a bit of a health scare recently, and I want to take the time behind the scenes to ensure that my career is as long and successful as possible. I love NASCAR, and I'm so thankful that Hendrick is prepared to welcome me back as soon as I am at full strength." Rick Hendrick also added to the conversation, saying, quote, "Tim has been one of the most electrifying drivers I've ever seen, and has done nothing but win with this team since joining us last season. I want him to do what's best for him, and when he's ready, there will be a ride ready for him, and we will make sure he is 100% ready." In the meantime, Jimmy Means would get an opportunity to drive for Rick Hendrick for the remainder of the season. Terry Labonte went on to earn a win at Watkins Glen in the 19th race of the season, but that wasn't the only story. Hendrick Motorsports entered an additional car for Paul Newman, who has a major passion for racing. The Hollywood actor and sports car racer would drive the number 51 car, as he would surprise many, finishing in 4th. Newman said afterward, with a big smile, that he had a blast and thanked Rick Hendrick for the opportunity. At the end of the season, it came down to Dale Earnhardt chasing his 3rd title and Terry Labonte chasing his 2nd. Earnhardt had a 71-point lead over Labonte, and for most of the race, he was in a good spot to clinch the championship. But that was until one point in the race, when Jeff Bodine got into the number 3, triggering a wreck that would take Earnhardt out of the race and out of contention for the championship. This major blunder would benefit Bodine's teammate Terry Labonte, as he would go on to take the Winston Cup championship for 1987. Labonte won it by 51 points over Earnhardt, and to add on to his championship resume, he had 7 wins, 15 top 5s, and 21 top 10s. Earnhardt, meanwhile, would go on to have 6 wins, 17 top 5s, and 20 top 10s. Bill Elliott would also have a great season, as he finished 3rd in the points, earning 7 wins, 13 top 5s, and 21 top 10s. Looking back on this season, Labonte, Earnhardt, and Elliott were considered the big 3 of that season. With that, here are all the winners and the final standings from the 1987 Winston Cup season. As you can see, both Kyle and Richard Petty finished top 10 in the standings. As you can see, Rusty Wallace and Jeff Bodine finishing 11th and 12th in the standings. And one last thing to note, Davey Allison continues to struggle. Some of the new changes in the Busch Series schedule include the Illinois State Fairgrounds and a new road course date, as the Busch Series went west to the newly renovated Riverside. That will also make a return to the Cup schedule. Other new tracks that debuted this season are Nazareth Speedway in Pennsylvania and Louisville Motor Speedway. In terms of silly season, Sam Ard is back in the number 00 machine, while modified legend Richie Evans will be teaming up with B.R. DeWitt to make a run at the Busch Series Championship. Jimmy Hensley will continue racing for his family team in the number 63, and Grant Adcox also went full-time in the Busch Series for the Marshall number 85. Richie Evans went on to make a statement early on in the season, as he would earn his first career Busch Series win at Darlington. In the very next race, Danny Marshall would make a return to racing. He would run solid for most of the race, but fell back to 29th. Jimmy Hensley went on to pick up the win. Then, one race later, Marshall would pick up the win at Langley, beating defending champion Larry Pearson. Marshall would go on to earn 4 more wins on the season, those being at IRP, Louisville, South Boston, and Bristol. A young driver began his rise to stardom in 1988, that being Rob Moroso, as the 20-year-old Connecticut driver earned his first win at Bowman Gray late in the season. Moroso would end up with 8 top 5s and 19 top 10s with an average finish of 11.71. Moroso was just 47 points out of the championship as he finished runner-up. Mike Alexander finished third in the standings as he had a strong season, earning 3 wins, 10 top 5s, and 19 top 10s. He finished third in the points, just 54 points back from the championship. As for the champion, it was a surprising one in the form of Richie Evans. Evans made the move to go racing in the Busch Series, and he made it all worth his while, as Evans would win 2 races and earn 9 top 5s and 16 top 10s with an average finish of 11.13. Jimmy Hensley had some inconsistency that cost him a chance at the championship, but he did win 6 races while earning 11 top 5s and 15 top 10s. Sam Art had 2 wins, 8 top 5s, and 15 top 10s, finishing 9th in the standings. And here are all the winners and the final standings from the 1988 Busch Series season. Moving over to IROC, Dale Earnhardt kicked off the 4-race season, holding off Al Unser and Bobby Rahal to win at Daytona. Then the Stars took a trip out west to Riverside, as it ended up being a showdown between IMSA drivers Chip Robinson and Al Hulbert. Sports car drivers reigned supreme in this race as Al Hulbert picked up the win. In the 3rd race at Michigan, we had a thrilling battle for the win between Chris Cord and Chip Robinson, as they were side by side down the backstretch on the final lap. However, from out of nowhere came Dale Earnhardt, as he made it 3 wide for the lead, and Earnhardt would go on to win at Michigan. As Terry Labonte, the 1987 Winston Cup champion, went on to win the final race of the season at Watkins Glen, it was Dale Earnhardt taking home the IROC championship for 1988. Moving over to the Winston Cup Series, Riverside returned with its new renovations and will be on the Winston Cup schedule for years to come. NASCAR would also host its first overseas exhibition race at the Calder Park Thunderdome in Australia. From 1988 onwards, another change is that the All-Star race will be rotating to various tracks, which we will cover each year. In 1988, it will be hosted by North Wilkesboro for NASCAR's 40th anniversary. Morgan Shepherd moved over to the Haas Ellington No. 1 car, with Mobil 1 coming over to sponsor him. Brett Bodine also moved up to the Winston Cup as he replaced Morgan Shepherd in the 26 for King Racing. Ken Schrader also remains in the number 90 for Junie Dunlevy, while Terry Schoonover remains in Lake Speed's number 83 car. Speaking of which, Lake Speed continued to drive for Danny Marshall in the 85 car, as Marshall limited his return to the Busch Series. Jimmy Means would stick with Hendrick Motorsports full-time, as he ended up taking Tim Richmond's place while he is on rehab. The 25 has been renumbered to 52, with Folgers remaining the sponsor. Jack Roush made the jump over to NASCAR to start up a Winston Cup team, as they fielded the number 6 Stroh's-Light Ford. With Mark Martin still with Bud Moore, Roush signs on short track star Dick Trickle to the team. And lastly, Bobby Allison ran the full 1988 season, since he never had his career-ending crash like in real life. Dale Earnhardt had waited all winter to show that he was not a driver to mess with. He wasn't happy with how the 1987 season ended, and would go on to dominate the 1988 Daytona 500. He took the lead in the second half and never looked back, winning his second Daytona 500 in the debut of the black GM Goodwrench paint scheme. He showed why he should remain the favorite, as he pursues his third Winston Cup. Earnhardt would add an exclamation point to his statement win with what may be the hottest start in NASCAR history, claiming the first 3 points wins in a row with victories at the reconfigured Richmond Raceway and then at Rockingham. Dale would go on to earn 7 wins on the season, taking home wins at the Spring Martinsville race, the return to Riverside, the Nashville Fairgrounds, and the Fall Rockingham race. In March, NASCAR held its first ever international race for the Winston Cup Series, an exhibition at Calder Park. Many drivers from down under were in the race competing against the Winston Cup regulars. It would be one of those locals taking the win, as supercar star Dick Johnson beat out NASCAR's regulars to win in Melbourne. Ken Schrader came so close to getting his first win at Daytona in 1987, but he and Junie Dunleavy's team would finally break out, winning the Trans-South 500 at Darlington. The Fenton, Missouri native showed that it wasn't a fluke because 2 races later, he would hold off another up-and-comer in Rusty Wallace to earn his second win at North Wilkesboro. This was certainly a breakout season for Schrader and his team. Speaking of Rusty Wallace, he had an incredibly consistent season, but couldn't quite earn his first win until the summer. Rusty's first career win came at Watkins Glen as he overtook Harry Gant on a late restart and then held off a hard-charging Phil Parsons for the win. Rusty would then win at Michigan the next week and then a third win at Texas World. Another driver that began to break out on the scene was an owner-driver from Wisconsin named Alan Kulwicki. Kulwicki would finish 16th in the standings, but he showed flashes of brilliance, including getting his first career Winston Cup victory at the Fall Bristol race. Afterward, he would perform what would end up being known as the Polish Victory Lap as part of his celebration. Despite Dale Earnhardt's 7-win season, a cold streak in the fall would cost him the championship. He would finish third in the standings, 168 points back. In second place was Bill Elliott with 5 wins on the year, but he would fall just short to Rusty Wallace. In the same year Rusty earned his first win, he got hot and would score the Winston Cup Championship. He may have only had 3 wins in what was a very competitive season, but he would have a series best, 17 top 5s and 20 top 10s. Rusty was quietly and quickly becoming one of the stars of the circuit. One more thing to note was the 18th race of the season at the second Talladega race. An awful crash happened that would take 2 notable drivers out of action. After hitting Benny Parsons' number 35 car head-on, Ken Bouchard would miss 2 races, while Benny Parsons would miss the rest of what was supposed to be his swan song season. Paul Newman would return for 1 race at Watkins Glen, while Mike Alexander would drive that car for the rest of the season. Benny Parsons announced that since his retirement tour got cut short, he would take the winter to prepare for one last Daytona 500 in 1989. This incident is what led to the creation of the restrictor plate, limiting the top speeds at Daytona and Talladega, and some discussions were had about what's next to make superspeedway racing safer. Here are the winners and the final standings from the 1988 NASCAR Winston Cup season. Some notable drivers that had a great season in 1988 included Phil Parsons finishing in 6th, as well as Lake Speed finishing in 10th. Davey Allison also improved to 11th in the standings for 1988, and Terry Schoonover would also finish 12th, as Bobby Allison had a disappointing season, finishing in 22nd. And finally, for part 1, we'll be covering the first half of the 1989 season. There are a few notable additions to the Busch Series schedule this year. 3 new short tracks joined the circuit: Volusia, Lanier, and Motor Mile. Meanwhile, in silly season, Jimmy Spencer remains in the Busch Series for another year, with ambitions to win the championship. At the age of 50, Sam Ard announced that 1989 would be his final full-time season behind the wheel. Grant Adcox continues to drive the Marshall Motors number 85, and Richie Evans has scaled back down to a part-time schedule, but he will have other drivers run the number 61. Two drivers from unique backgrounds, Richie Evans and Rob Moroso, exchanged the lead back and forth in the closing laps of the season opener, but in the end, it was Evans, the defending champion, adding a win at Daytona to his impressive resume. In the next race at Rockingham, Sam Ard led in the later stages of the race after most of the field was caught a lap down. Ard would go on to win to kick off his swan song season on a high note and close out a victory. Not to be outdone, he would also win the next race at Martinsville, both Darlington races, and Riverside. His thrilling retirement tour also included 11 top 5s and 16 top 10s. However, he would fall short of the championship. And moving on to the 1989 Winston Cup schedule, unlike real life, Sonoma does not join the Winston Cup schedule. Yet. This is due to Riverside still being around. With that in mind, there are no other changes. In terms of silly season, Hendrick Motorsports scales back down to 3 cars as they shut down the number 35 team. Jimmy Means continues to drive for the team in the number 52. Mike Alexander replaces a now retired Buddy Baker in the number 86 car. Davey Allison's number 28 team is now owned by Robert Yates. And Danny Marshall and Lake Speed merged teams and now have a 2-car operation with Lake Speed and Terry Schoonover as the drivers. The Daytona 500 gave us another first career win in 1989. This one a feel-good story. A short track star became a super speedway champion, as Dick Trickle would score the win in the Great American Race. He kicked off his second full-time season with a bang, and on top of that, this was the first win for car owner Jack Roush. This team could be worth watching going forward. They quietly brought Trickle to a Rookie of the Year win last year, but everyone knows them now. 1989 seemed to be full of first-time winners and big stories. When the Winston Cup returned to Daytona for the Firecracker 400, we had another upset winner in the form of Mark Gibson, who passed defending champion Rusty Wallace late in the race. This would go on to be the only Cup win of his career. These two upsets were impressive, but both would be overshadowed late in the summer. At the second race at Michigan, we had one of NASCAR's biggest upsets yet. This one, however, was history in the making. NASCAR is about to change forever, thanks to a driver not many took as a serious competitor until now. Coming off turn 4 and heading to the checkers, Means looks to the inside, but it won't be enough. History is about to be made. In just 9 years, NASCAR already looks very different from the real 1989. Tim Richmond is about to make a triumphant return to racing. Davey Allison still has a lot to prove. Dale Earnhardt is a multi-time Daytona 500 winner in his prime, and we have several new faces in victory lane. And it all started by just starting over. In the second part of Sunday Night Lights Restart, we'll reach 1997, where the series stands today. Things are about to get even crazier as the butterfly effect continues. There will be new stars, historic winners, and schedule changes you've never seen before. This series is a unique celebration of what makes NASCAR special. Every driver, owner, crew member, and track has a story to tell. Our timeline explores that in an entirely new way, as we watch things play out together. As Carl Edwards once said, history can be rewritten. Thank you so much for watching, and for those of you who are new, get ready for things to get even more exciting in the 90s. The second part of Restart will be premiering on Friday, May 17th, and I can't wait to see you there. After that, the 1998 season will fully get underway behind the scenes, with the video for that season dropping this summer, as well as more volumes of Racing Infinity one-off simulations inspired by Griffdawg's and our 2003 shorts. Thank you to everyone who's been involved in this series over the past few years, and I can't wait to represent the 90s in part 2 of Sunday Night Lights Restart. You think you've seen it all? Not even close. Racing history is about to change forever.